Welcome to You Make the Difference. I'm Wanda Scarborough, and I have as my guest today Joe Thompson. Joe and his wife are very active in historical reenactments, and we're about to have a historical reenactment here in our county. We're going to have one in West Point, and we're going to have one in LaGrange. Joe, you want to tell us what those are and when they're going to be?
They're going to be in April on the 13th and 14th. On the 13th of April in West Point, we'll have a program at Fort Tyler. It'll start at 10 in the morning, and the first part will end at 5, and it'll include musket demonstrations and tours of the fort and other demonstrations that'll be going on throughout the day. And then from 7 until 10, we're going to have an evening program, and you can come up and see the fort by candlelight. So we're real excited about doing that. Now that'll be on the 13th. And on the 14th in LaGrange, we're going to do a program that commemorates the Nancy Hearts. And that organization was set up to protect the city of LaGrange against any type of threat that might come up since the men were away. And so at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we'll have a speaker, we'll have the Nancy Hearts formed up, and we'd love to have you come out and visit with us on those two programs and learn about Fort Tyler and learn about the Nancy Hearts. So Fort Tyler on the 13th and the Nancy Hearts on the 14th.
Okay, and those are really important events for our county history, aren't they? And I'm not sure, how much people even know about the Nancy Hearts. So I wanted to just take a few minutes and tell about the Nancy Hearts. I know, first I want to tell about the original Nancy Hart. She was in the American Revolutionary War, and she was a tall, not attractive woman, and she served as a spy for the United States, and it was during the American Revolutionary War. One of the things that happened with her was that there were some Tories that came to her house one day, and they didn't know whose house they came to, but they killed one of her prize turkeys, and they brought it in and said they wanted Nancy to cook it for them. Well, she cooked that turkey for them, and they sat down to eat, and she served them some strong drink. And once they were more relaxed, they looked up, and she was sneaking their guns out a hole in the wall to her daughter. Well, they immediately went on alert, but she held them off with that gun that she had, and one of them made the mistake of coming closer. I'm sure she gave him a warning and said, "Don't come any closer." And when he did, she shot him and killed him. And she held the other 5 there until her husband got home. And I read an account where these men had made light of killing her neighbor while they were sitting around her table. And so she said that she wanted these men hanged. And so one day somebody dug up the grave, and they found the skeletons of these men. It said that they didn't really want it known that had happened because the Tories were in that region, and so you didn't want it known that you had killed 6 Tory soldiers, but that's what she did. So she also served as a spy, and she would dress up like a deranged man and enter into the camps of the British, and they would begin to tell their plans for the next day, and she would listen to those, and she'd bring them out, and she'd report them to our troops. And so she really was a war hero. And the Nancy Hearts of LaGrange, they were women who, during the Civil War, realized that when the men went off to war, that they were unprotected. There were 46 Nancy Hearts, and they were mainly Methodist women. They served at the hospital when there were wounded soldiers. They would go in and read those soldiers the Bible. They would write letters for the soldiers. They nurtured those soldiers, and some of them even took them into their homes to help them heal. And so they were really great women. they realized that the city was unprotected, so they began to get together and they practiced twice a week shooting guns, and the guns probably weren't good, right, Joe?
Well, they were the older guns because
Yeah.
all the military grade guns had gone off to war.
That's right. And these ladies were not very good at shooting because they probably hadn't had much practice, or if any, before then. But they took those guns, and it says that sometimes they closed their eyes when they shot, and they weren't very good at first. There's an account where they shot a bull, somebody's bull, by mistake, and also they shot a hornet's nest and had to run for cover. But eventually, these ladies got good with those guns, and they're recognized as a military unit. And then there was a day where their bravery was put to the test. And it started with the Battle of West Point. Tell
That's
about
right.
the Battle of West Point, and then we'll move into where the Nancy Harts did their really historical, brave stand against the Union troops.
Well, West Point was important because of the bridges across the Chattahoochee, the railroad bridge and the wagon bridge. And Wilson, at this time in April of 1865, was cutting through Alabama on his way to Columbus. And he wanted the bridges secured at West Point in case he couldn't take Columbus. He would have a way to cross the Chattahoochee River. And he sent Colonel LaGrange with a brigade to West Point on Easter Sunday morning. And as the troops arrived, General Tyler had sent out telegraph messages to all the neighboring areas there for all the troops that could to come in to the fort. And some of the troops from LaGrange actually, they were getting ready for church and got on the train, and it brought them up there. And but as the troops continued to arrive, the fight got thicker. The Federal cavalry under LaGrange finally secured the two bridges and had silenced the guns at the fort. And they stormed the fort, and the battle actually started about 10 in the morning, and by 6 in the afternoon, the fort had fallen.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that really connects Fort Tyler and the Nancy Harts is the fact that the next day, when LaGrange came to LaGrange, he brought the prisoners, and riding up front with him was Captain Parham, who knew one of the Nancy Harts, and that made a connection there. So it's very much a part of all this. And also, this was a few days after Lee had surrendered, which was on April the 9th, even though they were not aware of that. And it was the day after Lincoln died. He was assassinated on the 14th, and he died on the 15th, but that was not known as well. So it was a lot of things going on. But they left about 1 o'clock and got to LaGrange late in the afternoon, and met the Nancy Harts.
That's right. And you know, I'm sitting here thinking that how brave the Nancy Harts were, but the men in West Point were very brave too, because there were approximately 300 men. Is that right?
Well, it was actually less than that. It was about, there were over 3,000, almost 4 federal troops.
Yes.
And they were less than 300 in the fort. The numbers vary. They're as low as in the, less than 150, and then up to more. Some think that there were prisoners that LaGrange had with him. They were added to the numbers that made the numbers higher. But he was quite surprised that there were so few men in the fort that were holding off, the size of the troops that he actually had. And during the battle, one of the cannon shot actually killed his horse.
Oh, wow.
And finally, at the end, in the early part of the battle, the explosion of a shell had severed the rope that held the flag. And when they actually came to the point that General Tyler was killed about noon that day, and when it came time that they felt like that they were out of ammunition, there was nothing else they could do, and it was time to surrender the fort. They had surrounded it, had sounded another charge coming up the hill, because there'd been several. And so they ordered the flag brought down, and it wouldn't come down
Really?
because it had been nailed to the pole to keep it, after the halyard had been cut
Yes.
with the cannon shot. One of the soldiers had actually shimmied up the pole and nailed it
Yes.
to the pole. So they had to get a ramrod and put a white cloth on it and handkerchief and mark the surrender.
So he was surprised that day in West Point. And then I've heard that because his name was LaGrange, he wanted to come to LaGrange. And there he was truly surprised again because as they got to the LaGrange College area, they were met in the street by 46 women with their guns drawn. And these women were serious because they said, "You're not going to burn our homes." And so they stood in the street to protect their homes and their families. And it's told that, they got the news that the Union troops were coming and people were saying, "Take cover," but they would not have it. And so I am sure that Colonel LaGrange, when he came over that hill, he never expected to see women standing in the streets with guns drawn. And so he addressed the captain of the Nancy Harts, and she was firm with him. And he said if she would have her troops lay down their arms, then he would not burn their homes. And Clark Johnson, the historian of Troup County, said that Colonel LaGrange wasn't a home burner, but the Nancy Harts didn't know that. And he did do damage in the city. The troops did do damage in the city. But one of the things that happened that also is very impressive is that once they knew they weren't going to do battle, one of the Nancy Harts invited Colonel LaGrange to supper. And it's told that the Nancy Hart stayed up all night cooking for the troops. Another gracious thing is that Colonel LaGrange allowed the prisoners of war that he had taken that were from LaGrange to go home and spend the night with their families.
Those that had family. The others were in a sort of a place near one of the homes in LaGrange. But
Okay.
that's exactly right. They got to go home and spend that last few minutes with their families.
Yes, and then that next morning they all gathered to march toward Macon,
That's
right?
right. That's
And
right.
then somewhere before they got to Macon, I believe, they learned that the war was over.
It was right about the time they got to Macon.
Okay.
They learned that the war was over and that Lee had surrendered.
Yes. So, the Nancy Harts is a recognized military unit. And so our history is rich with that, right?
It is. It's very rich history.
Yes. And so one of the things that I want to tell about is that we started a local group called the Nancy Harts. And that evolved through Diane Coates learning of the Nancy Hart story. And Diane Coates was the host of this show for 12 years. And she was asked to speak at a prayer meeting up at the First Baptist Church. She told about the Nancy Harts. It was to a group of ladies. And she challenged those ladies. She said, these were brave women that stood for their town and the protection of their homes. And she said, it is time for the women of LaGrange to stand up. And so, some of those women had probably never heard the Nancy Hart story, and they were very impressed. And so once Diane finished her talk, she sat down at her table, and there was a lady who was named Nancy Wardlaw. She took out a pad and she began to pass it around. She signed her name and passed it around. And these ladies began to sign up to be a Nancy Hart. Now, that took Diane by surprise because she wasn't recruiting people to be a Nancy Hart as far as like an organization, but we did form a group of women who were called the Nancy Harts, and we met for approximately 9 months, and we did different things, placing women in areas of service so that they could serve in this spiritually military unit. And we decided after about 9 months that we would go on inactive duty, and that we would call those troops up when there was an event that we needed to have take place, or any new thing that surfaced that we needed to do spiritually in the city. And so there we were, a little bit inactive, and we had a surprise. And that was that Sue Pearson came to town. And first her sister came and was at the archives talking to Clark and looking just at the history of Troup County, because she was tied to Troup County. And then Clark said, well, you might really be interested in this story about the Nancy Harts because you're kin to them, kin to some of those ladies that served as Nancy Harts.
That's right.
And so she listened to the story, and then when she went home and saw her sister Sue, she told Sue about the story, and she said, this is really your thing. This is what you do. So here's the story, because Sue had done documentaries, and that was her livelihood. And they had no idea that they had such rich heritage in their family line. So since then, Sue's written a book, a novel, and it's going to be published this year. So it'll be coming out very soon about the Nancy Harts. And I believe it was November of 2011, I got a call from Clark, and he said that Sue Pearson had come here and she wants to do a documentary about the Nancy Harts. And she wants our local Nancy Hart group to be part of the women who are in the documentary. So, isn't that exciting?
It really is, and the history is so interesting, and it really means so much to be aware of it. And the way all of this has come together, it really is exciting.
Yes.
And we're coming up on this special date of 2015, which
Right.
will be the 150th anniversary of this event.
Right, and so she wants her documentary to be ready for the 2015 year, right?
That's right.
And so that's how you and I got involved with doing the reenactment. And the reenactment is to start building excitement in the community for the Nancy Harts. And so last year, I know you did, in West Point, you did the Battle of West Point. You had a day set up, and you invited the Nancy Harts to participate in that. And tell us how that went.
It went very well, and the ladies were really excited about coming together and forming up as a group and handling the firearms of the period, and they really looked sharp, and it was inspiring just to see it, and there was a lot of excitement among the group too. So we're real excited, and we expect even more excitement on this event.
Right.
And it's all building toward the documentary and then the anniversary, the 150th. This will be the 148th this year.
Yes.
And so it's an exciting time. And once you start reading about it, though, you really can't stop. It's
Yes.
just that exciting. The Battle of West Point, the Nancy Harts, the connections between the two, and then you start seeing names that you know people that are descendants of these people.
Yes.
And it's an exciting time.
It is. It really is. And you've been involved in doing a reenactment that was taped. Is that available for sale about the Battle of West Point?
Let's see. I hope that it still is, and I believe that it is. You could check at the West Point Depot and let them know if you're interested in that. And if you want that, I'm sure that it can be gotten.
Yeah. And last year while Sue was here, she filmed part of the reenactment that you did down in West Point with the Nancy Harts, with the
Right.
with the guns and doing the formations, and even there was an encounter with Colonel LaGrange. And
That's correct.
yeah, and she filmed those because she wanted to do a sizzler, and the sizzler is to get people interested in helping fund the Nancy Hart documentary, and so that's looking pretty good. and we really believe that that's going to happen, and that, Sue's hope and dream is that there'll be a movie made about the Nancy Harts.
Well, that would really be exciting. Doug and Katie Roberts put the one together on the Battle of West Point, and it really is good. And if we could have this other documentary to go along with it, and hopefully the Nancy Harts documentary will be a public television production, and people will be able to see it there too.
Yes. Now, let's say again when we're going to have our event, and this time I want to make sure we say where.
Okay.
All right. We're going to have the Battle of West Point reenactment will be
at Fort Tyler, which is on 6th Avenue, and it'll be on the 13th of April. The daytime portion of it will be from 10 until 5, and then it's 7 o'clock, and it starts early, so some people that like to come up and not have to walk in the dark. We're going to have the fort open at night by candlelight, and that'll go from 10, and from 7 until 10. So 10 till 5 and 7 till 10 on the 13th of April in West Point, Georgia.
Okay. And then the very next day, on Sunday, April the 14th, at 2 o'clock, we're going to have the Nancy Harts at 206 Broad Street, and that is the place where the Nancy Harts gathered together prior to marching up to the LaGrange College area. So we're gonna have it actually on a historical site, and we're really excited about that. We'll have some people tell the story. Sue Pearson will be here, and there will be women from LaGrange, and not only LaGrange, who come out dressed in the Nancy Hart attire, and we will maybe do some gun holding.
Well, there certainly will be some drilling, and so that there will be some martial, demonstrations there, and then it'll give you an idea of just what it was like when the Nancys were there and came to that moment that realized now's the time. This is what we've been. They came close in 1864 when during the time of the Battle of Atlanta, they had the Battle of Philpotts Ferry, but the Federals didn't quite get here, but they almost did.
And the Nancys were ready for that too, weren't they?
And here on this morning, and the 17th of April is when it actually took place in LaGrange on that Monday afternoon, and that's when everything that they had worked for, came to place. So,
yes. So
on that Sunday afternoon, the 14th, we're going to make note of this and mark its point in history.
Yes, and it's going to be exciting for the Nancy Harts to actually be able to be on location and run up on the porch and get their guns, and then begin to march out toward LaGrange College. And then after that, we'll probably go up on the square and have Nancy Harts there, so that people in the city begin to say, what's going on? If they haven't heard already, they'll be saying, what's going on? I want to tell you a story, Joe, that's related to the Nancy Harts. When we formed our group of Nancy Harts, we went to the Broad Street home. We wanted to have our picture made in front of the home, and so we were standing out there, and there was a guy who passed down the street, and so we stopped him and asked him if he would take our picture, and he said yes, and so we all gathered, and he took our picture. So we asked him his name, and he said his name was Repeat, and we said we were asking him about that, and he was a twin, and people called him Repeat and called his twin Pete. Of course, we know that joke about Pete and Repeat.
Right.
So we laughed about that. But Michelle Davenport, who was in our group, she's a pastor at City Light Church, she said that God was letting us know that we were about, or he was about, to repeat history, that the spiritual significance of what the Nancy Harts represented was about to be repeated. And it wasn't long until Sue Pearson came to LaGrange. And so we were very excited about that. And then probably 10 months after that, I got a call from the Chamber of Commerce, and they said that 3 men had come to town, and they were so interested in the Nancy Harts, and they weren't going to leave town till they could talk to somebody that could tell them about the Nancy Harts. And so she said, we thought about you. And this was a message on my phone. And so she said to this man, she said, tell me your phone number, and I'm going to leave it on this answering this message. And so he was giving me the phone number, and then she said, and your name is? And he said, Pete. So there was Pete and repeat in this Nancy Hart story. So the story just keeps going on, and we love it. And we don't know exactly what God is going to bring out of this, but we believe it's big because it just keeps getting bigger. And so I just want to say that I appreciate you and Debbie, your wife, who are so involved in keeping history alive in Troup County and also other places. But it is so nice to have people who know the history and who can bring it forth in such a fun, exciting way. And I just want to encourage all of you out there to make sure that you come out on that Sunday, April 14th at 2 o'clock on Broad Street. You'll be able to see the Nancy Harts out there in their attire. You won't be able to miss it. And I just don't want anybody to miss out on what's happening that day. And then if you are able to, go the day before and see what happens in West Point. I encourage you to do that. And I just want to thank you for watching our show and remind you that you truly make a difference. Thank you for watching.
Got a promise from heaven. It's a year of replevin.